Hi, my name is Cassie, and this is a presentation on sport policy and governance in Spain. Spain is located in southwest Europe's Iberian Peninsula, just 9 miles from Africa across the Strait of Gibraltar, and has access to the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. This gave it a very tumultuous history because this is a prime location. So, the Roman Empire was the first notable ruling in about 19 BC, and there's still traces of racing circuses, amphitheaters, and other Roman ruins which suggest early sport in Spain, such as animal slayings, horse races, etc. Germanic tribes came next, who quickly gave way to the Arab Islamic conquest, and they ruled for a while but eventually fell to Christian forces in 1492. The Kingdom of Spain also in 1492 came to be with the marriage of Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon. After this, the country experienced rapid growth with the discovery of the New World and the conquests and colonizations of North and South America, which created the Spanish Empire. After this came the Spanish-American War, the Spanish Civil War, and the Franco dictatorship from 1939 to 1975. After Franco's death, Spain became a democracy and a member of the European Union. Sport kind of began in the 19th century, originally for aristocrats at private clubs, but eventually began to take shape as things such as cycling, boxing, and soccer were accessible to those who didn't have a lot of resources or money. And the first athletics federations and the Olympic Committee were also created during this time. Barcelona hosted a Summer Olympics in 1992. Spain is a democratic sovereign state that operates under a constitutional monarchy. This means that the monarch serves as the head of state, while the elected prime minister is the head of government. The monarch really serves a symbolic role. They are sent to do things such as sign international peace treaties. They will be the one to declare war, and they have a couple royal prerogatives. However, all the power is in the rest of the government. The executive branch consists of the prime minister, deputy prime minister, and other ministers who form a council of ministers. And the legislative branch is a bicameral parliament known as the Cortes Generales, made up of the Senate and the Congress of Deputies. The judiciary branch is independent of the executive and legislative branches. Economically, Spain has a mixed capitalist economy, with the public sector operating schools, healthcare, some sport, and a few other things. Spain's a member of the European Union, so they use the euro as their currency, and recent economic trends in Spain have actually seen steady positive growth due to increased private consumption. The 2008 economic crisis broke 16 consecutive years of economic growth in Spain, but the country has now surpassed its pre-crisis peak, at least before COVID. Despite its economic growth, Spain has long been plagued with high unemployment rates, with the current rate sitting at about 14.2%. And this generally affects the younger population in Spain, who are jokingly known as ninis, ni meaning neither, because they are neither employed nor in school. Culturally, Spain is very diverse, and this is because it is made up of 17 different autonomous regions and 2 autonomous cities, which are actually located in Morocco. Many of these autonomous regions actually self-designate as nationalities. So, for example, Catalonia, Basque Country, and Galicia identify as their own nationality as well as an autonomous region. This means that there's a very diverse mix of languages, traditions, hobbies, etc. in Spain. So, for example, this flamenco dancer could be found in Andalusia in the south, but would not be found in Basque Country in the north. The official language is Castilian Spanish. However, the different regions have their own languages, such as Catalan, the language isolate of Basque, etc. Under Franco, the country was forced to speak only Castilian Spanish, but these languages did manage to survive and are now able to be spoken freely. The majority of people in Spain identify as Roman Catholic, with most of the rest identifying as agnostic or atheist. Spain is no stranger to political and social unrest. After years of suppression under the Franco regime, many autonomous regions began fighting for independence, most notably in Catalonia. The Catalonian fight for independence has led to frequent protests and political turmoil. In 2017, Catalonia passed a pro-independence referendum, and then this was declared illegal by Spain's constitutional court, leading to further demonstrations, many of which became violent. These movements and disagreements have even led to a lack of government. Spain's electoral system requires a parliamentary majority, meaning a political party must win the majority of Congress to be able to delegate a new prime minister. Social unrest and independence movements have led to the creation and election of numerous political parties. This has caused a political deadlock. No party has been able to win a parliamentary majority. These circumstances have required Spain to call for multiple snap elections in recent years, as there's virtually been no government. Corruption, both in politics and the royal family, has further led civilians to distrust the government. This is just a very brief example of some political and social unrest in Spain. There are kind of a lot of issues. The government's role in sport began after the Franco regime as an initiative for mass participation in public health. The 1978 Spanish Constitution has an article that reads, "The public authorities shall foster health education, physical education, and sports. Likewise, they shall encourage the proper use of leisure time." So this means that the state is responsible for access to sport, and this led to the development of an organizational framework, which consists of national, regional, and local governments. The central government of Spain has a sub-ministerial division responsible for sport, and this is known as the Higher Sports Council, or CSD, which you can see in the picture. And the CSD is a subdivision of the Ministry of Education, Culture, and Sport. It's responsible for basic sport legislation in Spain, and there is a very extensive piece of legislation known as the National Sports Act. And this outlines various principles such as mandatory physical education, sport for all, doping, and accessibility. And the Sports Act also outlines the power delegated to the CSD, such as authorizing the creation of Spanish sports federations and their competencies on issues of national interest, such as the Olympic national teams and the national governing bodies. The national governing bodies and the Olympic committees are private entities technically, but they are considered as working on behalf of the administration, and they're declared public interest, and they must abide by CSD laws. At the regional level, the autonomous communities are responsible for developing and implementing sport policy in their respective territories. Their roles and responsibilities are established in their respective statutes of autonomy, and these include the building or funding of regional sports facilities, promoting sport for all, and supporting elite sport. The regional sport federations control the sport clubs, and for these reasons, elite sport is attributed to both the NGBs and the regional governments. The 17 regional governments also adopt their own Regional Sports Act, which regulates the procedures to recognize clubs, sports associations, and sport federations in their respective autonomies. The local municipalities in Spain also have a significant role in sport because when the Spanish Constitution first adopted its policies, it was the municipalities who assumed the responsibility for making sport accessible. The public sector developed sport programs that became known as Sport for All, and per the Spanish Constitution, these were meant to foster well-being and make sport accessible to the general population. The municipalities organize sport activities, build facilities, and promote training courses. And while the regional and central governments are responsible for policymaking, the municipalities are responsible for implementation. These programs are funded by the public budget, whose primary revenue sources are taxes and contributions, and this funding is shared among the national, regional, and local governments. The sports landscape in Spain is, at least in my opinion, kind of complicated. So this flowchart can kind of help look at the different relationships while I work through each of the players in this landscape. So the Spanish Olympic Committee and the Paralympic Committee are headquartered in Madrid and are private nonprofit associations. The committees are governed by their own statutes and regulations within the framework of the Sports Act and the Spanish legal system, as well as the IOC. These are declared public utility along with the governing bodies, meaning that they're given tax breaks and economic benefits like grants and aids, despite being private. So you can see on the chart how the Higher Sports Council funds the Olympic Committee and the national sports federations. The committees are composed of member NGBs of Olympic and Paralympic specialties, and they're responsible for the registration and participation of Spanish athletes in the Olympic and Paralympic Games and fulfilling the principles of Olympism. The NGBs of Spanish sport, or at least the national ones, control the membership of the regional sport federations, which control the sport clubs. They also partner with the professional leagues. Using football as an example, the Royal Spanish Football Federation is the NGB of football in Spain, and is responsible for the government, administration, management, and regulation of football in Spain. They're also responsible for the Spanish national team, which represents the country in international competition. The Catalan Federation of Football is the regional sport federation in the autonomous region of Catalonia. They are a private organization that governs the regional sports clubs, such as FC Barcelona. These sports clubs range from youth to adult and amateur to professional. The overlapping governance of the national and regional sports federations is complex, and the CSD complicates matters further, as seen in professional sport. The National Sports Act defines what it takes to be considered professional, and it requires that the statutes and regulations for professional leagues be approved first by the CSD before being approved by the corresponding governing body. If a club is considered professional, it must become part of the corresponding professional league, such as La Liga. The CSD mandates that professional sports clubs register as sport public limited companies, meaning that their shares may be freely sold and traded. However, 4 teams are exempt from this for historical reasons. Furthermore, the professional leagues are subject to provisions from the public authorities, such as the Spanish Constitution, the CSD, the Sports Act, and the private rules of the status of the federations, the league, and the collective agreements. School sport, including elementary, secondary, and university, also have a place in sport governance. Physical education is built into school curriculum and mandatory in school before university. Private elementary and youth clubs are also abundant and very popular in Spain, though these require membership fees. The regional governments are responsible for these clubs. University sport in Spain is directed towards competition and the use of leisure time in a healthy way. It's organized by the Sports Services Department of each university, and the CSD developed the Spanish University Sports Committee to improve and coordinate university sport. Overall, university sport in Spain is very similar to the university club sport in the USA. It functions more for the sake of social integration and health rather than competition. So looking at this chart, you can see we covered all the, quote, non-governmental entities of Spanish sport, but you can see how they are all funded by governmental bodies. This is makes things kind of complicated. So taking a step further in the sports landscape, we can look at issues and controversies. The intersection of the private and public sectors, along with funding models, has led to controversy. There's been recent outrage because the CSD subsidies to the federations has decreased 44% between 2011 and 2017, and this decrease in funding correlates with less international sporting success, meaning that the Olympic athletes are not winning as many medals, the national teams aren't winning as much in international competitions, etc. The current funding model relies heavily on government subsidies, and there's just not enough funding for federations to fulfill their obligations. The country receives further criticism for allotting disproportionate funding to professional football rather than equal funding across all the federations. And there's even been recent legal battles. The General Court of the European Union has seen many cases involving Spanish football teams. Investigations found that Spain has given unlawful state aid to football clubs. As previously mentioned, 4 football clubs in La Liga did not have to register as sports public limited companies. These clubs are still being treated as nonprofit organizations and are being given tax breaks. This includes FC Barcelona, Real Madrid, Athletica Bilbao, and one other one that I can't think of right now, but this was considered an unfair advantage by the European Commission, though the General Court of the EU overturned this ruling. So despite the court's ruling, these cases still warrant public suspicion and outcry regarding Spain's sport governance. Spain's sport governance was developed after 40 years of the Franco regime, at which point the public was content leaving sport in the hands of the public sector. Now that sport has grown and seen success on an international stage, the governance has simply become outdated and can no longer afford to fund the growing sports sector. Spain's sport governance is, in my opinion, overly bureaucratic and highly ambiguous. Ambiguous meaning that it's hard to tell where the public sector ends and the private sector begins, and vice versa. This has created a system where the private NGBs and Olympic committees rely on the state, allowing the state to maintain a position of hegemony. The complex bureaucratic laws do not help in this regard, and the state's history of unfavorable distribution of aid has led to mistrust and outrage. Tension between the state and the autonomous regions will only make this worse. While I believe the sport governance should be rethought, I'm not sure that change is on the horizon given the current political and social issues in the nation. Thank you for watching.